on Iran stuff. The other day, the current U.S. president put tariffs on the three major trading countries with the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and China. And I was surprised to see that actually Mexico exports more to the United States than China does. Now, that wasn't always true, but it is true now. And anyway, I wanted to talk about world trade and tariffs. And one of the key points I want to make here is politicians can do whatever you want, but in the end, the consumer is who's going to decide where something is made. The consumer. There are things that every consumer has to buy. Gasoline is one. Food is another. Shelter is another. Those are mandatories. You have to have shelter. You have to have heat and cool. You have to have food, and you have to have probably transportation of some kind. Okay, that's the basic stuff. All right, within that, whenever the prices go up or down for anything, it starts impacting, and the consumer has to make a choice. If gasoline got really, really expensive, he might not drive his car into the city anymore, might take a bus. It's more economical to take a bus. If the price of a particular food product, like a brand name, gets too high in price, a consumer can make a decision to use a store brand that is a cheaper price. No matter what, tariffs, trade, whatever, the consumer in the end is the linchpin. He's the one who makes the decision as to the impact of tariffs and world trade. World trade. World trade's been going on since forever. Columbus got sponsored by Spain or whoever it was to find a new route to get spices. They couldn't, I don't think they had pepper in Europe, or Spain or wherever it was, and they had tasted pepper and they liked pepper, so we'll send you out and see if you can find a shorter route. We got to bring it around via land or however they did it at the time, and so there's always been that. And in the case, a good example is during World War II, the Philippines were the primary source for natural rubber. The Japanese invaded and controlled most of the Philippine Islands. So they had control over natural rubber. That was a problem for the U.S. It was a problem for the Germans. They both put efforts into creating synthetic rubber. Okay, there was a case where the trade got the Japanese. In fact, if you take it farther back, before World War II, Japan had already invaded China in 1939 or 37, whatever it was. And they were acting really bad on China, and we opposed it, but we took no military action. But we put sanctions on them on their oil imports. We would not sell them oil. And that was part of, they don't have any natural oil. They have to import it all. And they only had like 90-day stockpile in the tanks that they had. So our sanctions on their oil imports was one of the reasons they finally, it was like, we got to do something about this. So that was another parameter of trying to keep what they didn't really want to conquer the United States. They just wanted to inhibit their ability to have a big naval and military presence in the south, in that portion of the world, off of the coast of Japan and China and Philippines and all the way down to Australia. Okay, free trade's been going on forever. There are instances that I can give you where because of regulations and such, like environmental, there are certain things that we just do not make in the United States because it's too polluting. India has a significant air pollution problem. So does China. Both countries rely on a lot of coal, burning of coal to generate energy, power, electrical power, and for heating fuel. And the air is terrible. They don't have the same EPA requirements, so some of the items that go into cars are so nasty to make that they have to be made in a country that has lesser EPA regulations. That was especially true in Mexico. They didn't have even water quality standards for a long, long time. And some manufacturers go to Mexico and set up a plant and just have whatever waste is coming out of the plant, no matter what is chemical, what was in there, would be dumped in whatever river or stream was there. And that was okay with the Mexican government, was okay with the manufacturer, because he didn't have to spend extra money cleaning that chemical out of that waste product. Okay. Trade's been going on forever. What really took off, and the economists, economists becomes a science on its own. And in the 60s and 70s, the economists of the world had convinced those in political power that world trade was a good thing. That having something manufactured in another country would benefit those people and help their standard of living rise up, and at the same time it would provide a relatively cheaper product to the U.S. consumer as opposed to what could be made here under our current economic, political, regulatory, union environment. Okay, the government was convinced it was a good thing. So we did open up. We actually encouraged other countries to export products to us. Now, obviously, the major example, right after World War II, Japan was the major exporter. And they exported a lot of electronics. They exported steel. They were a major steel player for a long time. They were one of the factors on killing American steel because they could make it cheaper there and export it. One of the factors on world economy and free trade, if you will, is, if you think about it, what we're doing is the differences between countries, besides the regulatory EPA environmental issues, it comes down to labor. They have a massive amount of people and they live at such a low level of standard of living. They'll work for 10 cents an hour, whereas in the United States we've already risen to the level where anybody has to get paid $2-3 an hour. Okay, so manufacturers, the government, everybody said, hey, let's go over and have the Chinese do it for 10 cents an hour, and without a whole lot of thought about those people who were making $2 an hour or $3 an hour at a local small business manufacturing something, be it I don't know, a trinket, a souvenir, or even small boilers or small refrigerators. Or once upon a time were a lot of varieties of everything from coal stoves, wood stoves, pots and pans, beer, everything. There was localities, manufactured locally. And it probably populated around where the large population centers are, so you didn't have to have a big distribution system or an expensive distribution system at the time. But they were there. So, and I've stated before, small communities, there was a manufacturing facility in close proximity or close enough that you could get there, and high school education was all you needed to be able to become a blue-collar worker in a small local factory making a widget. But you had to have $5 an hour or $7 an hour or $6 an hour, whatever, to live. That was a living wage at that time, minimum living wage. And then the government came along and said, well, we need Medicare and Medicaid for everybody, so we're going to start taxing you. And we had to start income taxes and all that sort of regulatory pressure. And companies had to, they didn't have to initially, but as a perk, they began to add health insurance. They had to roll that cost into the wholesale level of their product. Wholesale being they sold it to somebody else like Sears or Roebuck, who then advertised it in catalogs or put it in their stores. They managed the whole distribution of it. The endpoint distribution of it was done by somebody else. They then added a profit on because of their abilities to manage this product all the way up the supply chain, keep appropriate stores of it, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Free trade did improve the lifestyle, improved the conditions for the Chinese. It has improved the conditions for the Indians. Every country that has been exporting value-added products, that's what I'll call them, where there was some raw materials turned into a particular product that was sold to the American consumer or American industry. Okay. There was a big benefit to those countries. Not so much a big benefit to blue-collar workers in the United States. Companies said, look, I can't compete with a refrigerator coming out of China. They have such a much less lower labor rate. They don't have the same EPA regulations. So I just can't compete. They tried. People said, look, this is like the same quality as that. I'm going to buy the cheaper Chinese made good. Without understanding, by doing so, they were going to put American workers out of work. That's the whole free trade thing. The government, consumers, regulatory, taxes, that all worked to gut the American middle class blue-collar worker. I think the idea was that sometime maybe in the 80s, 90s, or 2000s, I don't know, was that we didn't need to make anything here. We were intellectuals. We were all highly educated. We would design things here and have it made by little elves over there. We would be the designer. We would be the intellectual power of the world. And it was interesting, first time I saw an Apple phone, it said right on the back, designed in California, manufactured in China. Designed in California, manufactured in China. That's been true for a lot of other products as well. The mechanical aspects of it and so on. The world was, China, India, they at one time needed us to supply all that sort of supporting build information. They don't need that anymore. They have an educated population. They can come out with new products on their own. They don't have to just fill an order from us that says, here's a set of drawings, make me 10,000 of those as cheap as you can. Okay, world trade's always been around. Alright, middle class is gutted. The whole living wage issue comes up. Not everybody is got the wherewithal to go to college. Others go to college, not find it to their taste. They don't have high educations. A lot of jobs are requiring, again, our whole tech industry has been rising up. The computers, IBM personal computers, been rising up. You need more and more education. You need more and more experience to get a high-paying job. As the government likes to say all the time, we're going to create more high-paying jobs. How do you do that with the blue-collar workforce that you have? That is tough. So one of the pendulum swings this way and then it swings that way. So if the pendulum swung to free trade, it's great for everybody. Well, no. I heard an economist say free trade is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It will, in the whole, if you look at it from every direction, it will help everybody. It will help the standard of living of everybody. But there is some small price to be paid always when you start juggling with these sorts of things. That small price was the American middle class, the blue-collar worker. And I can understand their desire to unionize and control their own destiny, their fate in that perspective. The problem is that companies, you know, if the price of labor gets too high, and that is what's happened. A lot of American companies said, look, I'm not investing any more in American infrastructure of my plants. I'll take them to Mexico. I have cheaper labor there. I have less health insurance requirements there. I can make the same product or better in Mexico or in China and just bring it into the country tax-free, no tariffs or anything, at a lower price than I could possibly make it in the United States. Okay? That's what's been going on. American car manufacturers make a lot of cars in Canada and Mexico, and we're simply bringing them across the border. And that's another aspect was, you remember, I don't know what year it was, but the government of the U.S. and Mexico and Canada all agreed we would have free import-export between the three of us. There would be no tariffs on anything we imported from Canada or we exported to Canada, and the same way with Mexico. That was going to again improve everybody's standard of living and keep the price of consumer goods as low as possible. What a great idea, except they totally missed the boat again. Labor is cheaper in Canada and Mexico is the United States. So what happened? Car manufacturers build cars in Canada. Car manufacturers build cars in Mexico. Lumber. Canada has lots of woods and trees and forests. They can be a big lumber source. We have imported a lot of lumber from Canada. It's interesting. We have a lot of coal. We're one of the world's biggest coal deposits. Okay, and we had a lot of oil at one time, and we still do. But for various reasons, EPA being one of them, and the pollution of coal, we still export a lot of coal to the world, believe it or not. You know, even though we're all concerned about our own air pollution, we don't seem to care much about India or China. If they want to buy tons of coal from us, we'll do it. And you say, well, you can't just not stop exporting oil, because think of all those West Virginia coal miners, or the oil being pumped out of the ground in Texas and Oklahoma or wherever it is. You put that industry in the trash. You can't do that. Political considerations, economic considerations. Okay, so here comes the pendulum has swung the other way, and in the case of China, there's some logic to it. China is a weird case. I'm not sure. We do the same thing in a way, but they do it in a bigger extent. And that is, in China, it used to be everything was owned by the government. The Chinese government owned every factory, and everybody was an employee, basically, of the Chinese government. Okay? Well, after Mao died, it crept in, and they had watched the Soviet Union. The same thing happened to them. At one time, every factory in the Soviet Union was owned by the state. But they saw that all that tended to do was to kill individual motivation or individual desire to be able to improve themselves by perhaps making a product better or cheaper than was coming out of that state-owned factory. Okay? They eased off on the individual. They would let individuals keep a share of the farm, the products that were grown on the farm. In the past, the government had required a big share of it. If the government found out if they left the farmers more, or they said, look, if you grow this much for us, anything more than that you can keep. Well, guess what? That was a motivation, and the farmers, everybody benefited from that. Okay? And that was true also in the industries in the Soviet Union, and it happened there first before the Chinese saw the same thing, that if they let individuals, and there was some funding of it to the Chinese government, to start companies that were individually run, started and ran for a profit. The individual could keep some portion of the benefit of the value added he had added to that product. Okay? So, both China, Soviet Union, India, other places have gone to that sort of more American style of industrial revolution. The individual is motivated to create a better, cheaper product if he can. And if he will, then the consumer will decide which product to buy, which product to support and not. Okay, I'm getting there slowly. Now we have tariffs. In the Chinese case, as I said, they have, once upon a time were all government owned. Okay, but they said, okay, let's try, we'll experiment, we'll let individuals. Well, it turned out to be great. China people started setting up factories to build wood floor, and they could sell it in the United States, and the United States had no way to compete against the labor costs of those people making that wood floor in China, as well as the environmental regulations that we have here. So wood floor manufacturing in the United States dried up. It could not compete with what was being imported into China. In certain cases, there are factories in China which are still owned by the Chinese government, and because they collect taxes and so on, they can actually, like the steel industry, they can own the steel industry in China, the government can, and put steel on the market at such a low price per tonnage that no other country in the world could possibly produce that steel at that price. They're doing it because their government is subsidizing that price. They're not making a profit on that steel. They're losing money. But they do it to drive all the other competitors out of business. And that's one of the arguments the U.S. government has been trying to get across to the Chinese for the last 10 years. This is unfair trade practice where your government is basically subsidizing a particular industry to gain a competitive advantage worldwide and drive all your competitors out of the market. That's one of the reasons that you do start coming around the idea to tariffs. If you're going to be selling your steel at 25% less than anybody else in the world can produce it at, then only fair thing for us to do is put a 25% tariff on your steel. That way, manufacturers in other countries, or maybe even the United States, will have a fair shot of producing that steel at or slightly below what China is selling it, exporting it as. That's the idea behind tariffs, is to level the competitive field in some way. In the case of China, it is absolutely valid because some manufacturing done in China is subsidized by the Chinese government. Now, my point I said earlier was that that's true in the United States. It's really true particularly in the defense industry. We have also, the federal government has also bailed out our automobile industry more than once. They have provided very low interest rate loans to the big automakers when things were bad. When the Japanese started importing Japanese-made cars in the United States, the American car manufacturer could not compete. The product was superior in quality and cheaper in price. The Japanese cars just about decimated the American car industry. So there was legislation put in, and one of the things they did was they said, look, if you want to sell into the American market, you have to start building your cars here. We won't outlaw Japanese-made cars in the United States, but we'll say, if you want to sell here, you got to invest here. You build your plants here, that'll give American blue-collar worker jobs. That creates blue-collar worker jobs. That was another way it was dealt with. Biden put 100% tariff on electric-made EVs. Now, if he was really interested in EVs and pollution and everything, he wouldn't have done that. He would have allowed the Chinese to come in and sell their $12,000 electric car. And if people were really interested here in pollution and world environment and every climate, they would have bought those $12,000 electric car, and the American car manufacturer would have gone out of business because they can't make them for $12,000. So Biden says 100% tariff on those vehicles. I think it would have been much better if he took the approach that we took with the Japanese and their industry, saying, look, if you build them here, if you invest in America, you build plants that we will have workers employed at, then you can come in, or we'll only put a 25% tariff on your goods, but you must invest in America. I think that, and that should be the approach, I think, for any rational country. It's okay that the Chinese own this hotel and that hotel and this piece of farmland and so on, and they bought Smithfield hog manufacturing. They own the plant, but the workers are American workers. And yes, some profit goes back to the Chinese, but it also creates American jobs. Tariffs. I looked it up and I was curious. Okay, what are the major imports from the United States, from Mexico, China, and Canada? Number one is transportation, buses and cars. That's because American manufacturers build cars in China, no, not China, in Mexico and in Canada. And that's an easy supply chain part there. Number two on the list is computers and electronics. Most all American manufacturers of computers took all their manufacturing and sent it all to China. We design it here, but they manufacture it. iPhones, computers, that whole big thing. Even though we could make computers here robotically, our taxing system and our investment system by the federal government doesn't support it very well. We don't give enough investment sort of taxing that is required for American companies to put the money in to build big plants that would employ a lot of people, but it would be made here. Machinery, except electrical. There are some cranes, big giant cranes used at ports and other places, that only has one manufacturer, and it's in China. If you need that crane, you got to buy from Chinese. It's not made anywhere else. There are products now like that, and the Chinese may have even invented that particular machinery or that particular crane. They now be a leader in that. Mining tools of all kind of types. Oil and gas, we still import. This is our imports, oil and gas, we still import that. Miscellaneous manufactured commodities. Primary metal products, we imported that. Food and kindred products. That's way down the list. It's 106 billion a year. It's not a major fabricated metal products. Some are structural steels for buildings and cars. Other is forks and knives and crap like that. Petroleum and coal products, we sold that. Plastic and rubber products, 71 billion a year. Okay. If I look down, way down, textile mill products, wood products, scrap and waste, believe it or not, minerals and oil, forestry products is only 2%. We still make a lot of our own wood products. Furniture and fixtures, $44 billion of that. Beverages and tobacco, 30 billion. Okay, what I'm trying to say is livestock and livestock products is 13 billion out of a, well, I don't know what the total, I did write it all down, but I can, first three numbers and over $1 trillion. It's probably $3-4 trillion a year of imported goods. And if I look down at like textile and fabrics, it's 8 billion. Certain things, certain categories, the tariffs, yes, and I have to tell you one more time, I'm getting way too long on this. All this tariff stuff happens at the wholesale level. All the products that are being imported are being imported by a wholesaler. He is the middleman. He imports it, he takes care of all the paperwork and everything, gets it off the dock, puts it in a warehouse someplace. And then he sells it to a retailer or someone else down the line. For example, and it's an interesting example, Walmart has their own cargo container ships. They do so much trade with China, they went ahead and have built their own container ships, so they're not dependent upon worldwide shipping in that sense. They're sort of their own middleman in that sense, their own wholesaler. So the wholesaler level is where these tariffs, that's where it's going to hit. Now, most retailers, when they buy from that wholesaler, they're okay, this product's now 25% more product to me. They can't eat that whole 25%. They cannot. Now, they can raise it maybe less than 25 and still make a profit on it. There is wiggle room in there, but they have to do something. Okay. If the price rises on a product in the grocery store, at the parts store, whatever, the consumer, it makes a decision. I can't afford that. I cannot buy that at that. Again, a brand name is 50 cents more expensive than a store brand. I buy the store brand. Car. A used car is cheaper than a new car. In fact, that's what drove up the price of used car market, was the cost escalation of new cars. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, of which the government is a big part of it because of their regulations, because of the demands they make on medical insurance, on this and on that and that and this. And I'm not opposed to any of those things. I'm just explaining to you why things can go up. But in the end, tariffs is really not a good tool, but it can be a good bargaining chip. Just like we did with the Japanese after World War II. If you want to sell your cars in the United States, you have to make them here. Or at least a significant percentage of it has to be made here. Okay? That may be what Trump is headed for. That will bring American manufacturing back in the United States and somewhat reduce foreign blue-collar workers. I don't know what's wrong with that. I seem like to me, well, what the big problem is the blue-collar worker in America got decimated. The Rust Belt, there are lots of segments of the population, by just freely saying, yeah, we encourage the Chinese to build these widgets because it'll make everything cheaper. in the long run, it benefited them more than it benefited us. So you can say, well, my wife will say, you know, clothes today are really not any more expensive than they were 30 years ago. And there's probably some truth to that, because now the Chinese really aren't making the clothes anymore. It got shifted over to Vietnam or Bangladesh or some even cheaper labor market. And you can keep that going if you want to until you run out of cheap labor, like Africa might become a giant textile producing country and everybody in the world will be buying their clothes from some African country. But then again, you have the same sort of at home, what are you going to do with this large group of people who are, I don't know how to describe it, they're blue-collar workers. They work in manufacturing plants. They build things. They assemble things. That's part of it. They don't design them. They work. They do the manual labor that's required to add value to hunks of metal, to raw oil, to other things. Okay, long-winded, but that's my take on the economics of world trade, which I think the intellectuals just, you know, well, I hear it was best for the American consumer. Yeah, it has kept prices low and lots of stuff, but sooner or later, you know, food prices. We have built up, the rest of the world has not been stagnant. They have been educating themselves. They have been digging up their own raw materials out of the ground. They've been learning stuff. They exporting stuff and improving their lifestyles and so on. So many more people around the world really like peanut butter and jelly when they can get it. It's still expensive in their country, but they can now afford it. So they are a competitor for that product. That's going to, you know, unless peanut butter and jelly people start making more of it and not being like harassed by the government, or, you know, they build a bigger plant, now they have more real estate taxes to pay on that plant. You know, the union comes in and says, I need a living wage of $37,000 an hour. It's all related. The government is an aspect of it, the free market is an aspect of it, labor is significantly an aspect of it, and free trade, where you're talking about 7 billion people in the world, that's a lot of labor force to be used on any one thing. This is Uncle stuff. Hopefully this will actually record and I can put it up, even though it's way too long. But it helps me get it off my chest. Uncle Ron stuff. Today is the 3rd of February 2025.